Okay, are we on? Okay, thank you. So thanks to everyone who's coming today to hear the political discussion, which I usually avoid. But sometimes you got to discuss politics because it affects your life. And I want it to be, and I think Bob will agree with me on this. I want this to be a discussion, not a debate. We're not going to, make statements and counter statements and then counter those statements and then end up throwing things at each other across the distance from Virginia to South Carolina. We're not going to do that. Are we, Bill? Are we, Bob?
No way.
Okay, good. But I want to discuss, I want to bring up some points about the political debate between the left and the right, or as I put it in the question, who's destroying America? Which side is worse, I guess, is the point. I want to try to bring up some points that are not usually brought up. And I know Bob has a very subtle viewpoint, and I know it's also at variance with mine. So at least I think it is. May not, I mean, these things change over time, but who knows? So I should maybe say a word about Bob. I don't know what to say about Bob. He's a scientist. He's a PhD in something or another in physical science, maybe computer science. What's your actual PhD in, Bob?
Electrical engineering.
Electrical engineering. Okay, well, that's a physical scientific
field. They did not give computer science degrees when I got my PhD.
Back in those days, the computers were made from sticks and stones anyway, right? Back in those, not quite. But Bob, for example, is one of the very early researchers in chess programming. He was back there even before the time that I couldn't beat all the computers. I'm sure whatever computer he had, I could beat it back in those days. Now I can't even touch my cell phone. But this is way back when in the early days. He was in the early days, and he had a long and distinguished career at Bell Labs. Am I right about that?
Yes.
Bell Labs. And he for a long time ran an objectivist club at Bell Labs. Am I right about that too?
True.
And I know he ran a discussion list back in the days when there were no discussion lists, because I was on that list. So I know he did that. So he's a fine fellow with a long-time association connection to objectivism and knows his stuff. And even so, he's still wrong about some things. But, what can you say? So let's talk about the right and the left. And I want to make this conversation somewhat informal. I have some points to make myself here and there. But let's start with Bob. Bob, you want to start off and make some points about the question of where is the real destruction? Well, first of all, the question itself has some assumptions, as most questions do. I'm assuming that the country is being destroyed, but I think that's pretty evident that it is. But maybe Bob has something to say about that. But in any case, why don't you go ahead and say something first, Bob, and then we'll kind of go back and forth.
Well, I may cause this to depart very much from where you want it to go.
That's okay.
My first question is, why do we care?
Oh, okay. Would you want me to try to answer that, or do you have an answer you want to present first about that?
Well, I assume we care in the name of justice, and we want to be on the right side of particular issues. So,
okay. I would have said, if I may put this somewhat contentiously, I would have said we want to do it in the name of pragmatism, in the name of surviving, because things are going the wrong way. I mean, by the way, justice and survival are by no means at odds. They are, if you pursue them both, they're the same thing, actually. But I would have put it in terms of survival, that things are getting, and the culture is getting worse. That's the intellectual culture, I think, is getting worse, not the physical. I mean, we certainly are still advancing in science and technology, and we have things like iPads, which I'm on right now, which I would really have loved to had an iPad as a kid, but it was inconceivable You couldn't even imagine it in science fiction. An iPad could not even have been imagined. The closest thing to it was, I think, Isaac Asimov imagined something that was sort of like a hand calculator in his Foundation series, you know. But back then, you couldn't even imagine. So there are many unimaginable advances in science and technology that have kept us at a pretty good standard of living for now. But that's not going to last forever if the culture continues to go bad. So that's where I am on that one. I think it's important because it's a matter for our survival, and certainly it's a matter of justice as well. All right, so back to you, Bob.
Okay, a second question is who? Who are we talking about when we say right and left?
Yes, that's a good question, and I'm going to have to take some drugs before I can even, because these questions are too hard. I got to have a little something here.
And I was talking with my wife just a little bit before we started, and
yes,
and she would like to equate Biden with the left and Trump with the right.
Oh, I wouldn't do exactly either of those things. Biden is certainly on the left. He's not the worst, you know. I would say, you know, he's not in the same degree of leftism as an AOC or Bernie Sanders, but he's on the left. Trump is, of course, a loose cannon. So he can go, loose cannons shoot both ways. You know, they can shoot it. So I want to try to, if possible, not talk too much about Trump. I'm going to forbid anything or try to forbid anything, but my thinking is not to talk so much about Trump. It creates all kinds of, you know, weird anomalies to even consider Trump. But you know, you can bring in Trump if you want, and I may do so myself. But I wasn't going to think of it in terms of Trump. To tell you what I will do, I'll give you a definition of left and right from Ayn Rand, from her article in the Ayn Rand letter called The Disfranchisement of the Right. Now, this was 1971. So it's actually after the time that she is frequently cited as having given up on the conservatives, which is, they say, you know, about 60 and then 60 after the 64 election, particularly. So this is subsequent to that time. So it represents not necessarily her final view, but at least a view after she had some disenchantment with the conservatives. Anyway, here it is briefly. Since today there are no clear definitions of political terms, I use the word rightist to denote the views of those who are predominantly in favor of individual freedom and capitalism, and the word leftist to denote the views of those who are predominantly, keyword predominantly, in favor of government controls and socialism. As to the middle or center, I take it to mean zero, i.e., no dominant position, i.e., a pendulum swinging from side to side moment by moment. Now, that was in 1971, and I would certainly agree if you want to say, without putting words in your mouth, Bob, if you want to say that we've migrated leftward since then, I agree with that. We've gone, the left has gone leftward and the right has gone leftward, but I actually think that here's the right and here's the left. I don't know how that is on your screen, but here's the right. It's been kind of like this. They're both going leftward, but the left has gone leftward faster than the right's gone. Yeah, okay. The left has gone leftward faster than the right's gone leftward, but they both have gone left. So we are, and that's just a trend that I want to make something up. But anyway, there's Ayn Rand in 1971, and then of course, that leaves us with the problem of identifying who is it that qualifies to fall under those categories now, because it's a very confused situation. So. I have something more to say, but I still want Bob to say something first. So go ahead, Bob, if you want to, go ahead.
Well, the next point I wanted to make was on, it's not so much the men as it is the ideas, which I'm sure you agree with.
Yeah, sure.
And so,
but of course, it is humans that have ideas. We're not talking about dogs here. particularly.
Yeah, but
And
we,
we
do
are,
want-
so
we would like to identify the ideas, and maybe we can find humans that are particularly promulgating those particular ideas, and maybe we can't. But
yes, okay,
we are in agreement
right.
that there's an intellectual battle here.
right, okay,
So I think that it's worth some time asking, what are the ideas that are destroying America?
okay. Would you care to answer that, or give an answer? And then I think I know what your answer is. I mean, we've been over
Well,
these things.
yeah,
We both of us have been around. Both of us have been around the track a few times. We still got a few miles left, though. We're not done. But we've been around. So go ahead. I think I know where we're going with this, but go ahead.
So, well, you introduced this discussion as being political. Got to have a political discussion once in a while. And so if you focus on politics, I would say, well, we know the answer there. Statism is the hideous idea. Collectivism is the hideous idea. Individualism is a great idea. And one that's a more controversial, but I think equally true, is democracy is an evil idea. So we could say, well, which of the various sides or people are pushing which of those ideas? And then we would get an idea of whether it's one side or the other or both that are destroying America. So
okay, all right.
So you got any reaction to that?
Yeah, I could make a cheap shot by saying the Democrats are for democracy because they're Democrats, but that would be pretty cheap, wouldn't it? Yeah, I think that you can find there some degree of advocacy of all those viewpoints across the board. Well, I don't know about across the board. I think in the some region of the left, you cannot find any individualism, any notion of proper notion of individual rights whatsoever, and they're almost pure statist collectivists, of a pure sort. Now, they're not necessarily socialists. I think actually the people that call themselves socialists, like AOC and Bernie, are really fascists. They're classically fascist. As Ayn Rand, Ayn Rand got it right. What a surprise. She says in the moratorium on brain, she says, I have stated repeatedly that the trend in this country is toward a fascist system with communist slogans. That is so right. That's the trend. We're getting that right now. That's what we get all the time from the left, specifically from the left, and more specifically from Bernie and AOC. They really advocate fascism because they're not that interested in nationalizing maybe they will be someday. They're not that interested in nationalizing industry. They're interested in having the government control it every which way, and that's fascism. But the difference between fascism and socialism is not very significant. It's a totalitarian violation of rights either way, and that's where we're going. So I think the answer to your question is the trend is, as I say, the trend has been going leftward in both the left and the right, but the left exemplifies it much more obviously and completely.
Yeah, I would be hard put to find anybody on the right even who has said anything, let alone voted as if rights were important. But let's go just a little deeper and ask, like when I say democracy is really an evil idea that's destroying America, what I mean is that there's hardly anybody, except for a few criminals and all politicians, who would in fact go out and stick their hand in your pocket to take your money. But practically everybody would allow the government to do that if the majority voted for it. So that's the sense in which I'm saying democracy is evil. and it should be fought. Now, underneath that idea
right.
is well, sure, it's wrong to take something from somebody, but if the majority says so, it's all right. So there's where the collectivism comes in. But now, why do people want to take something and use it for anything at all? And that gets to the next level, and that's the ethical level, as opposed to the political level. Do you want to discuss the ethics at all? Are there ethical ideas that are destroying America that one side versus the other pushes more than the other?
Yes, there are, and of course it's worth discussing.
Okay, go ahead.
You want me to? Okay. Well, I'm going to let you discuss the standard argument here about altruism, which I don't disagree with exactly. I just think it's far from being the complete story, because if you talk about altruism, then that does sort of lead somewhat in the direction. It's not good enough, but it leads in the direction of saying the left and the right are equivalent, which is what some people are arguing these days, and which I think that's a terrible fallacy. I think it's a epistemological error. It's a violation of Rand's razor. It's an integration of things in disregard of necessity that you can't really. I don't think you can integrate the left and the right. But if you talk purely about altruism, then you can say, well, altruism is the norm in the culture everywhere, and in some sense, I think that's correct. I mean, at least as lip service. I do question. I don't know how far we should get into this. We maybe need a separate discussion about altruism and other things, but I guess I've stepped into it. So I don't know how many real altruists there are. Is Hillary Clinton an altruist? Well, I would say no. Is the matron
altruists?
Okay, so I mean,
nobody.
I was about to say, well, you can live partly, but I was about to give the example of the matron saint of altruism, Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa was no altruist. She's dead, isn't she? She was no altruist. She explicitly and on many occasions said how wonderful it is that people should suffer. She wanted people to suffer, and she was successful in that. She had miserable, her touted hospitals had miserable conditions, and Dylan says, yeah, she's dead. Anyway, she's no altruist. So where are the actual altruists? I think there may be some religious people out there that are sort of altruistic. Let me just add one thing quick. Besides that, possibly you could refer to, I'm not sure, but I think you could refer to somebody like Bill Gates as an altruist, because he's an interesting case. He's a very interesting case, because there is no precedent that I can think of. If you try to think, if you can, Bob, there is no precedent in Atlas Shrugged for guys like Bill Gates and Bezos, possibly Musk, a number of these guys that are enormously productive, but are totally philosophically screwed up. There are no cases of that. In Atlas, the good guys, maybe they don't have an explicit philosophy that's right, but implicitly they're right. The bad guys are screwed up, period. You don't have the really screwed up bad guys that are productive, but we do in this culture. So maybe there's some altruism there. I'm not sure. But I think the dominant motivation of the bad guys in this culture is envy, schadenfreude, the desire to see other people pulled down, and egalitarianism, which is the somewhat better looking form of schadenfreude. Those things are very strong across the left. You don't see it so much of it on the right. You don't see nearly as much envy. And I'll give you an example. It's purely anecdotal, but it's interesting, and it leads to something else. I must confess, I once watched the entirety on television of a Trump rally before the election. You may say what you will about me. I watched the whole thing. Anyway, what what interested me about it is Trump referred to, there were these two women who were two elderly women who were following him around, and they're in their private plane from one place to another. They were obviously quite wealthy, and he mentioned that they were wealthy women. And the interesting thing about that to me was that there wasn't the kind of reaction in the crowd that you will get if you get a leftist crowd. The leftist crowd hate people that are rich. They just hate them, and they want to pull them down. And it isn't so much even that they desire to be wealthy. They're just nihilistic. They desire destruction. That's what they want. I didn't see any of that at this Trump rally. I did not see that. The people seemed very benevolent and good-natured about the whole thing. Now, I don't know, this is an anecdote, but what it seems to me, something that could have arisen from this that didn't, but what I would like to see in our politics, and that Trump maybe made a slight move toward, because Trump, by the way, whatever else you want to say about him, he's not envious. He doesn't drip with envy like all of the Democrats. What I'd like to see in the direction that Trump sort of went a little bit is to line up people politically on the lines of the productive versus the parasites, not the rich versus the poor, which is kind of the way the Democrats, Republicans sort of have it. Not in terms of envy, but in terms of everybody that's productive, whether they're rich or poor, celebrates productiveness. And there's you remember, I should try to quiz you, Tom, Bob, but you remember Tom Colby in Atlas Shrugged? Almost nobody remembers Tom Colby because there's so many characters in Atlas. There's so many characters. Tom Colby, I will. I'm about to. Tom Colby was the foreman, not the foreman, the union leader, the leader of the Reardon Steel Union, and he has a little meeting with Reardon, which I actually wrote down here somewhere, but I can tell you what he said. What he said to Reardon was, he said, most people say it's Fred Kinnan, the regular labor leader, Fred Kinnan and I against you and Orrin Boyle. That's what most people say. But actually, it's you and I against Fred Kinnan and Orrin Boyle. And that, of course, is right. And if somehow our politics could become lined up that way, we'd be heading towards a much better age. And I saw a little bit of that in the Trump group. I don't believe in the deplorables notion. I think most of those people, by no means all, most of those people are productive and love America. And they love America because they love freedom, because they know freedom. They know at some level that freedom is what allows them to be productive, and they are productive, even if they're not super wealthy. They may not be the highest in ability. But those people, it would be nice if those people could hook up with the productive people. And if somehow the productive people like Bill Gates could learn what's wrong with their position and they all get together, that would be a wonderful thing, because unfortunately we do have democracy to a large extent, and everybody's vote counts. So if you've got if you got a few productive people that are super geniuses, they're not going to make the difference as far as the politics. You have to enlist the productive people that are the everyday sort of guy who is productive and believes in being productive, wants to be independent, wants to stand on his own, but isn't a genius. Well, that guy has a vote, and it would be nice if we could get those. So that's a thought anyway.
Yeah, I want to go back a little bit to what seems to be very mysterious about altruism. And that's that neither one of us believes that people live by altruism. And yet altruism is a major factor in how people live, because explicitly it is believed to be good. And so even though they don't want to live by it, or they would like to live by it, but they know they can't. So they feel guilty when they don't. So I'm pointing out that there's something exceedingly evil about altruism.
Uh-huh.
It's an idea that must be fought if this culture is to be better than it is.
Well, I agree with that, but I'm not as absolutist in a certain sense. I'm going to resort to anecdote again, which of course is not to convince, it's just to get some thoughts going. When I was growing up as a youngster in Southern California, my family was very Democrat, not socialist, but quite left, on the edge, but not quite socialist, but definitely in that direction. I don't remember being taught anything about altruism. I just wasn't that I can remember at all. But I think the overarching theme was egalitarianism. Everybody should be equal. Now those things are not unrelated, but it's different. It's a difference. It's a difference, and I think it's maybe a significant. There wasn't even a lot of envy in that I can remember. It wasn't like that they wanted to be. My parents wanted to be the captains of industry, and they just wanted everybody to be. They wanted things to be equalized, at least to some degree. That's what they wanted.
If you had asked your parents, "Is it good to be selfish?" what would they have said?
I don't know. I'm guessing that they'd be against it.
Right.
They'd be against it. That's because the word selfish. This is one of these long debates that we've gotten into on Harry's list and other places. That's because the word selfish has a lot of baggage attached to it. Now, if you could somehow separate all of the, all of that out.
Yeah, supposing you had asked
and got to the point of asking about is rational self-interest okay?
Yes.
I think the answer would have been more nuanced. I doubt that they would have said yes, but I don't think they would have said, "Oh no, you can't ever engage in yourself." I don't think so. I don't believe they would have said that you can't engage in self. They would have given the standard. I think what is the standard kind of answer, which is yes, it's good to be selfish up to some point, and then you have to be concerned about other people and again, egalitarianism comes into play. I don't think that most people believe in pure altruism as it was conceived by Comte. I don't think so. Or even, I don't even think they give lip service to that. I don't even think they give lip service to the pure, and they certainly don't give lip service, I think, in general, to the pure, beyond altruism of Immanuel Kant. I mean, Kant went past altruism because he doesn't want anybody to get anything. Desserts are irrelevant. So it's even worse. But most people don't believe in that.
But if you ask, is it good to act in your self-interest? Should you get moral credit for acting in your self-interest? My view is that most people would say, no, you don't get moral credit for that. Sure, it's practical to act in your self-interest, but good? No, that's not good.
I don't know, but I think that this is all speculation for me. But I think what they would have said would be maybe they would have separated morality from it, possibly. But the word "good" is it good to act yourself in? Well, yeah, to a certain extent, because you need to stay alive, and it's good to stay alive. I don't think my parents would have said it's bad to stay. I just don't believe it. They weren't Kantians. And I don't believe whatever influence Kant has, it's not by having people explicitly advocate his morality, his deontological morality, which I don't think most people do. His influence is from other means. Anyway, we've taken longer to get where we are than I thought. Of course, that's always the case. And I set up this thing so that at 5:45 we'd go over to Clubhouse. So first of all, Bob, are you going over to Clubhouse, or are you not?
I'm unable to do that.
Okay, that's all right. No problem. I'll act in your stead. I'll see what I can do. I'll try to do what I can do. But I did want to mention a couple of other things. Quick points. I'll make them as quickly as I can. One is another epistemological point. I think. Well, no. Let me back up. Let me give you some of those. Name some humans that have some good ideas, and we can talk about both of those ideas. I wrote down a list at one point just off the top of my head, and I haven't improved it. But there's Thomas Sowell, Walter Williams. Well, he's dead now. Heather McDonald, Victor Davis Hanson, David Horowitz, Shelby Steele, Clarence Thomas, Roger Kimball, Mark Levin, Daniel Pipes, and then I have some others that are more controversial, but I still think they're good. And I could, keep going on. There is no comparable list of such people. And just think, the one to keep in mind, so as to not overload your crow, as they say, is Thomas Sowell. Keep in mind Thomas Sowell, brilliant guy, genius, basically, brilliant guy, has a lot of good ideas, and yet, but he's not an objectivist, and he doesn't. I'm not sure that he's a flaming altruist, but he probably has some altruism. Anyway, these people are much better than anybody on the left. It just isn't close, and I think there's a reason, which I don't think has come up comes up very rarely in discussion, if at all, and that reason is epistemological. And I'm going to state it as briefly as I can. The right believes in tradition. When I grew up, my attitude towards tradition was nonsense. Tradition is nonsense. I'm a scientist. I don't believe in tradition. Go do the scientific study. That's how you learn stuff. And hell with tradition. Okay, but tradition is as Sowell puts it somewhere, it's distilled experience. So tradition is a, shall we say, primitive form of inductive reasoning. It isn't really under the proper epistemological controls that it should be, but there is an inductive nature to it. And a really good example is the common law. The common law is developed from experience over time, is revered by the traditionalists, is hated by the people that want to enact laws, but it's there's something to it, and so they have a better epistemology. The left's epistemology is fantasy making. They create utopias out of their imaginations, and then tell us that we're going to have we're going to have the the withering away of the state and the classless society and all this stuff. Where do they get out of their imaginations, basically? So they are rationalists, in the objective sense of the term, not the sense of using reason, and that use imagination to arrive at their conclusions, and the traditionalists use experience. Now, it's not perfect. The traditionalists also have this thing called faith that they use. So it's not a perfect comparison. Well, the leftists have their faiths too. They have faith in ecology and faith in
unadmitted.
So that, unadmitted faith. So that's my epistemological point. And then the one other thing I wanted to say quickly, and I'll turn it back to you, is look at history. I made this point before at other times, but I still think it's a really important one. That is often, people, when they talk about politics, they think too much of the present time. But if you look at, let's say, the last 100 years or so, it is a progression leftward. Maybe I don't know when it starts. 1913 was an annus horribilis because we got the Federal Reserve, we got federal income tax, and we got direct election of senators all in 1 year under Woodrow Wilson and a Democratic Congress, by the way. And then this has continued on. We got all kinds of stuff during the New Deal. One three-letter agency after another, and then we've gotten since then more and more three-letter agencies and more regulation. Now it's not exactly steady. Occasionally it wobbles, this progression, but a key fact is it's pretty much a ratchet. When you get something like Social Security in, you could have a hell of a time getting it out, because among other things, such things create their own constituencies. You get Social Security, you get right away retired people as a constituency, plus all the bureaucrats that are employed running Social Security, they're also constituencies. It's really hard to go backwards from that. And so it's a ratchet. We just keep turning leftward. And I see us going in the direction of 1984. I don't know when that's going to happen. And then we get Anthem after that. And by the way, notice those are secular dictatorships. Those are not religious dictatorships. All right, I could say a lot more, but I really have to turn it back to you because it's just, I've said enough for a while.
Well, let me give you George Will as a better person on your side.
George Will. Oh, man. Okay. he's a mixed case, but sure, they're all mixed cases.
They're all mixed
right?
cases.
But George will, okay.
And of course, one of the things about mixed cases is that people may see the good and swallow the bad part because you're blinded to the bad part because of the good part, which is a very good reason to be very careful. In like I would give you Steve Pinker on the left, and you would point out all the bad that's in Steve Pinker, and I would point out the good that's in Steve Pinker.
Yeah, but I would say if you want to stack up Steve Pinker against Thomas Sowell, it doesn't work. Steve Pinker is awful. He's just awful. But he looks like Steven Pinker just published a book on rationality.
Have you read it?
Only selected parts. I have not finished it yet. However, I know for certain that he does not advocate rationality. I know absolutely certain because Steven Pinker is an absolute denier of free will. He denies it absolutely. And you cannot possibly be an advocate of rationality if you deny free will. You can't come close. You can make the noises. And Ayn Rand, by the way, she always does this. She anticipates these situations. She says, "Don't look for somebody's advocacy of reason." And this is an ITOE. She says, "Look what they say about axiomatic concepts." Well, axiomatic concepts have no role in Pinker's theory, and certainly not the axiomatic concept of free will. He absolutely just flatly denies it. He also, by the way, hates Ayn Rand and is disgustingly compares her to the Nazis. It's just awful. So there's really, and Pinker's, see, you have to read all of his books to really appreciate. I can't say I've read completely all of them, but I read How the Mind Works, which is probably his most famous book. And as someone said, it doesn't work that way. He's a complete mechanist. He's an utter and complete mechanist. And that shows up in his later, when he talks about other stuff, it shows up later. He doesn't, well, I could go on and on about it, Pinker. Let me stop before.
Well,
I got lots of things to say about Steven Pinker.
But you're just underlining the point that I made, is that these people are mixed, and you can swallow the bad by getting confused and emphasizing the good. And you shouldn't do that.
That's true.
There's one other point, at least, that I'd like to make before we close. And that is that if we're looking at bad ideas.
We got more than 5 minutes. So maybe I was rushing you too much. So go ahead. Take your time.
Well, I went from democracy being bad to altruism being bad. So, and then you got into epistemology. And the issue there, of course, is whether or not you're a conceptual being, what rationality really means. And underlying that is a metaphysical point that you also raised, and that is, hey, what about free will? And so, which of these ideas are worse in destroying America? Is it the epistemology? Is it the ethics? Is it the politics? Is it the metaphysics? And of course, the answer is, well, they're all bad, and they're all taking part of the destruction. But you can say which one hierarchically has more power, more influence on the others, and there you got to get down to epistemology.
Agreed. Right. And, which is why I wanted to make that point that I made about the fact that although neither of them has what we would consider to be a proper epistemology, the left is much worse because of they emphasize fantasy, a pure imagination over experience, and that's bad. It's terribly bad.
But what is the right answer epistemologically?
Well, we think the right answer is objectivism, right? We think that, or at least that's a good.
What aspect of objectivism?
Well, I'm not. You're leading up to something.
What's the most essential thing? The thing that drives most of the other.
Well, the word that comes to mind is reason. but maybe you have some, or maybe
There you go.
conceptualization,
Yes.
which are two aspects of the same. Those are two aspects of the same thing. So now, I would say, having read both Thomas Sowell and Steven Pinker, neither are perfect conceptualizers, but Thomas Sowell beats the pants off of Steven Pinker in his concepts. That's my judgment. Anyway, they're not talking about the same subjects by and large. So that makes it a different comparison. But I'm saying Steven Pinker is really bad in a lot of different ways, all the way down. Even though he has, he sounds good. Again, I didn't want to get so much. I'll tell you what. Let me just say one other thing. I don't want to get off on Pinker because that's a whole other discussion. I wanted to say one word about religion, because religion is, explicit religion is more of a rightist phenomenon. But I think religion was killed in 1859, murdered by Charles Darwin's Origin of Species, which basically destroyed the only good argument, the only argument worth considering at that time for the existence of God, which is the argument from design. Basically, all the other arguments, to me, obviously suck. But Darwin killed that. But God is a strong guy. It takes him a long time. You got stabbed in the back, but it takes him a long time to die, and he hasn't died yet. But if you look at the Pew Research Center, which does some very good polling, their methodology is, in my judgment, pretty good. They're aware of many of the problems of cold calling and stuff. Anyway, their results for years and years have been a steady decline in religion in America, especially Christianity, but also, and a steady increase, though still small and absolute numbers, of religious nuns. And I don't mean N-U-N-S, I mean N-O-N-E-S, religious nuns, which includes atheists and agnostics and maybe some other stuff. That's been a steady, and I see that as continuing, because I don't believe the story that some people put forth that science is losing its credibility in the 20th century. I think that's totally wrong. Science has got more credibility, and increasingly more all the time. And religion is going to be gone. Now, I don't know when, and I can't say that it's impossible. I would not say that the probability of religious dictatorship is zero, but I do think it's small. And so that's another reason why I think what we need to do is oppose the left. And I have actually said, I guess I'm going to say it here too. I've actually said years ago on Harry's list, for example, that only Jesus can save America. And what I mean by that is not that religion is true, because it isn't, but what I mean is that if all of the Christians were to be raptured today, this thing about being raptured, you go up to heaven and all that's left are your clothes, maybe, and all the good Christians go. If they were to instantly be raptured, go to heaven, I think the left would take over right away. There'd be no opposition. It certainly wouldn't. Objectivists couldn't do anything. All 25 of them. No, more, but it would be hopeless. We have to hope that the religious, mostly religious, not entirely, most of the religious right will give us enough time, will provide us enough time for the philosophical, educational solution to the problems of our society. We've got to have to, because those solutions have not yet come into place, and they aren't close to coming into place. There's no evidence I can see that we're getting anywhere close to putting in the things that have to be put in place in the educational system to reverse things. It's going to take a time if it happens, and the current right wing is the only thing that is between us and destruction, as I see it. Okay, Bob, you get the last word, sir.
Well, the last word, I guess, is that I think the most crucial thing that is missing in our culture is a grasp of Ayn Rand's theory of concepts.
Well, I guess we're going to agree with. I'm probably going to agree with that.
And
that's one of them. That's certainly one of them. Certainly one of the key things. Yeah.
If there were, if there's a choice between something that furthers that knowledge and anything else, I think that's the thing to pursue. Of course, there is
Okay.
no such
It ain't going to be
choice.
Steven Pinker.
Oh, nor do I believe that. Uh,
Okay.
what Steven Pinker does that is positive is get people to think that maybe rationality is okay, and that's a lot better than Kant saying rationality is not okay. So it's a step in the right direction, although you need it's a minuscule step in the right direction. But we need more steps in the right direction. So I'm not
Okay. I think we can agree with that last part there for sure, Bob. So thanks a lot, Bob. I think I'm going to let you go, and I'm going to go over to Clubhouse and misconstrue every word you said. No, I won't do that. I promise I won't do that. But thanks again, Bob.
all right.
And
Quite welcome. Glad to be here.
I hope all of you, whoever is on, just go over to Clubhouse and join in. Dylan, how are we doing here? Is he still there? Okay. I guess because they're waiting over there at the Clubhouse, I guess. So let's thanks again. Oh, I want to just say one quick thing. I got to say one quick thing. In a couple of weeks, at least this is the current plan, I've gotten Harry Binswanger to agree to a discussion on a topic, something like where is the integrative mechanism of the mind? Where does it subside? Is it in consciousness? Is it subconscious? Where is it? I think I have a disagreement with him, but I'm not sure because he said I don't really have a disagreement with him on it. So I'm not sure, but we're going to discuss his idea of the reactive subconscious as against my view that consciousness is all about volitional management. So this should be a very interesting psychoepistemological discussion. So I hope to see you then. And